The Human Cycle by Sri Aurobindo. Chapter 11. The Reason as Governor of Life. Reason, using the intelligent will for the ordering of the inner and the outer life, is undoubtedly the highest developed faculty of man at his present point of evolution. It is the sovereign, because the governing and self-governing faculty in the complexities of our human existence. Man is distinguished from other terrestrial creatures by his capacity for seeking after a rule of life, a rule of his being and his works, a principle of order and self-development, which is not the first instinctive, original, mechanically self-operative rule of his natural existence. The principle he looks to is neither the unchanging, unprogressive order of the fixed natural type, nor in its process of change the mechanical evolution we see in the lower life, an evolution which operates in the mass rather than in the individual, imperceptibly to the knowledge of that which is being evolved, and without its conscious cooperation. He seeks for an intelligent rule of which he himself shall be the governor and master, or at least a partially free administrator. He can conceive a progressive order by which he shall be able to evolve and develop his capacities far beyond their original limits and workings. He can initiate an intelligent evolution, which he himself shall determine, or at least be in it a conscious instrument, more, a cooperating and constantly consulted party. The rest of terrestrial existence is helplessly enslaved and tyrannized over by its nature. But the instinct of man, when he finds his manhood, is to be master of his nature and free. No doubt, all is work of nature, and this too is nature. It proceeds from the principle of being which constitutes his humanity, and by the processes which that principle permits, and which are natural to it. But still it is a second kind of nature, a stage of being in which nature becomes self-conscious in the individual, tries to know, modify, alter, and develop, utilize, consciously experiment with herself and her potentialities. In this change, a momentous self-discovery intervenes. There appears something that is hidden in matter and in the first disposition of life, and has not clearly emerged in the animal in spite of its possession of a mind. There appears the presence of the soul in things, which at first was concealed in its own natural and outward workings, absorbed and, on the surface, at least self-oblivious. Afterwards, it becomes, as in the animal, conscious to a certain degree on the surface, but is still helplessly given up to the course of its natural workings, and not understanding, cannot govern itself and its movements. But finally, in man, it turns its consciousness upon itself, seeks to know, endeavors to govern in the individual the workings of his nature, and through the individual and the combined reason and energy of many individuals to govern, too, as far as possible, the workings of nature in mankind and in things. This turning of the consciousness upon itself and on things, which man represents, has been the great crisis, a prolonged and developing crisis in the terrestrial evolution of the soul in nature. There have been others before it in the past of the earth, such as that which brought about the appearance of the conscious life of the animal. There must surely be another in its future, in which a higher spiritual and supramental consciousness shall emerge, and be turned upon the works of the mind. But at present, it is this which is at work, a self-conscious soul in mind, mental being, Manomaya Purusha, struggles to arrive at some intelligent ordering of itself and life, and some indefinite, perhaps infinite development of the powers and potentialities of the human instrument. The intellectual reason is not man's only means of knowledge. All action, all perception, all aesthesis and sensation, all impulse and will, all imagination and creation imply a universal, many-sided force of knowledge at work, and each form or power of this knowledge has its own distinct nature and law, its own principle of order and arrangement, its logic proper to itself, and need not follow, still less be identical with the law of nature, order and arrangement, which the intellectual reason would assign to it, or itself follow if it had control of all these movements. But the intellect has this advantage over the others, that it can disengage itself from the work, stand back from it to study and understand it disinterestedly, analyze its processes, disengage its principles. None of the other powers and faculties of the living being can do this, for each exists for its own action, is confined by the work it is doing, is unable to see beyond it, around it, into it, as the reason can. The principle of knowledge, inherent within each force, is involved and carried along in the action of the force, helps to shape it, but is also itself limited by its own formulations. It exists for the fulfillment of the action, not for knowledge, or for knowledge only as part of the action. Moreover, it is concerned only with the particular action or working of the moment, and does not look back reflectively, or forward intelligently, or at other actions and forces with a power of clear coordination. No doubt the other evolved powers of the living being, as for instance the instinct, whether animal or human, the latter inferior precisely because it is disturbed by the questionings and seekings of reason, carry in themselves their own force of past experience, of instinctive self-adaptation, all of which is really accumulated knowledge. And they hold sometimes this store so firmly that they are transmitted as a sure inheritance from generation to generation. But all this, just because it is instinctive, not turned upon itself reflectively, is of great use indeed to life for the conduct of its operations, but of none so long as it is not taken up by the reason for the particular purpose man has in view, a new order of the dealings of the soul in nature, a free, rational, intelligently coordinating, intelligently self-observing, intelligently experimenting mastery of the workings of force by the conscious spirit. Reason, on the other hand, exists for the sake of knowledge, can prevent itself from being carried away by the action, can stand back from it, intelligently study, accept, refuse, modify, alter, improve, combine and recombine the workings and capacities of the forces in operation, can repress here, indulge there, strive towards an intelligent, intelligible, willed, and organized perfection. Reason is science. It is conscious art. It is invention. It is observation, and can seize and arrange truth of facts. It is speculation, and can extricate and forecast truth of potentiality. It is the idea and its fulfillment, the ideal and its bringing to fruition. It can look through the immediate appearance and unveil the hidden truths behind it. It is the servant and yet the master of all utilities. And it can, putting away all utilities, seek disinterestedly truth for its own sake, and by finding it, reveal a whole world of new possible utilities. Therefore, it is the sovereign power by which man has become possessed of himself, student and master of his own forces, the Godhead on which the other Godheads in him have leaned for help in their ascent. It has been the Prometheus of the mythical parable, the helper, instructor, elevating friend, civilizer of mankind. Recently, however, there has been a very noticeable revolt of the human mind against this sovereignty of the intellect, a dissatisfaction, as we might say, of the reason with itself and its own limitations, and an inclination to give greater freedom and a larger importance to other powers of our nature. The sovereignty of the reason in man has been always indeed imperfect in fact, a troubled, struggling, resisted, and often defeated rule, but still it has been recognized by the best intelligence of the race as the authority and lawgiver. Its only widely acknowledged rival has been faith. Religion alone has been strongly successful in its claim that reason must be silent before it, or at least that there are fields to which it cannot extend itself, and where faith alone ought to be heard. But for a time, even religion has had to forego or abate its absolute pretension, and to submit to the sovereignty of the intellect. Life, imagination, emotion, the ethical and the aesthetic need have often claimed to exist for their own sake and to follow their own bent. Practically, they have often enforced their claim, but they have still been obliged, in general, to work under the inquisition and partial control of reason, and to refer to it as arbiter and judge. Now, however, the thinking mind of the race has become more disposed to question itself, and to ask whether existence is not too large, profound, complex, and mysterious a thing to be entirely seized and governed by the powers of the intellect. Vaguely, it is felt that there is some greater Godhead than the reason. To some, this Godhead is life itself, or a secret will in life. They claim that this must rule, and that the intelligence is only useful insofar as it serves that, and that life must not be repressed, minimized, and mechanized by the arbitrary control of reason. Life has greater powers in it, which must be given a freer play, for it is they alone that evolve and create. On the other hand, it is felt that reason is too analytical, too arbitrary, that it falsifies life by its distinctions and set classifications, and the fixed rules based upon them, and that there is some profounder and larger power of knowledge, intuition, or another which is more deeply in the secrets of existence. This larger, intimate power is more one with the depths and sources of existence, and more able to give us the indivisible truths of life, its root realities, and to work them out, not in an artificial and mechanical spirit, but with a divination of the secret will in existence, and in a free harmony with its large, subtle, and infinite methods. In fact, what the growing subjectivism of the human mind is beginning obscurely to see is that the one sovereign Godhead is the soul itself, which may use reason for one of its ministers, but cannot subject itself to its own intellectuality without limiting its potentialities and artificializing its conduct of existence. The highest power of reason, because its pure and characteristic power is the disinterested seeking after true knowledge. When knowledge is pursued for its own sake, then alone are we likely to arrive at true knowledge. Afterwards, we may utilize that knowledge for various ends. But if from the beginning we have only particular ends in view, then we limit our intellectual gain, limit our view of things, distort the truth, because we cast it into the mold of some particular idea or utility, and ignore or deny all that conflicts with that utility or that set idea. By doing so, we may indeed make the reason act with great immediate power within the limits of the idea or the utility we have in view, just as instinct in the animal acts with great power within certain limits, for a certain end, yet finds itself helpless outside those limits. It is so indeed that the ordinary man uses his reason, as the animal uses his hereditary, transmitted instinct, with an absorbed devotion of it to the securing of some particular utility, or with a useful but hardly luminous application of a customary and transmitted reasoning to the necessary practical interests of his life. Even the thinking man ordinarily limits his reason to the working out of certain preferred ideas. He ignores or denies all that is not useful to these, or does not assist or justify or actually contradicts or seriously modifies them, except in so far as life itself compels or cautions him to accept modifications for the time being, or ignore their necessity at his peril. It is in such limits that man's reason normally acts. He follows most commonly some interest or set of interests. He tramples down or through, or ignores or pushes aside all truth of life and existence, truth of ethics, truth of beauty, truth of reason, truth of spirit, which conflicts with his chosen opinions and interests. If he recognizes these foreign elements, it is nominally, not in practice, or else with a distortion, a glossing which nullifies their consequences, perverts their spirit, or whittles down their significance. It is this subjection to the interests, needs, instincts, passions, prejudices, traditional ideas and opinions of the ordinary mind, which constitutes the irrationality of human existence. And we have a footnote on the ordinary mind. The ordinary mind in man is not truly the thinking mind proper. It is a life mind, a vital mind, as we may call it, which has learned to think and even to reason, but for its own ends and on its own lines, not on those of a true mind of knowledge.